Now, COVID-19 has disrupted our world on so many levels. We've just heard one example. Now, if you feel you're just not coping with all the disruption, now's the time to really listen up. Times of change, whether caused by a global pandemic, the death of a loved one, or any other big life event, not easy to navigate. This is something that human potential and parenting expert and author Nikki knows all too well. Now, in November 2017, her beloved husband of 26 years, Simon, was murdered in a home invasion. Her new book, released this week, has vital lessons not only on how to navigate devastating loss and disruption, but also how to adapt and even thrive through a pandemic. Nikki joins me now to talk about future-proof yourself, how to win at work and life. Nikki, thank you so much for joining us. A truly extraordinary book, and it couldn't be better timed. I'm just wondering whether it was driven for you primarily by how we were all impacted by the pandemic, or whether it was primarily driven by your own deep personal loss.
Sally, it was really a combination. I did a lot of work starting last year with the pandemic around helping large organizations to cope with sending 6,000 people home to work. And I wrote a white paper called The Realities of Working from Home with Kids, which went viral. And that actually was the beginnings of the book. And then I realized that there were commonalities, that everybody was dealing with this huge sense of loss of control, loss of this sense of normal, and that there were very close relationships to loss and grief, which I knew all too well from my journey after the loss of my husband. So I started pulling those threads together. And the more I looked at it and the more I worked through my own experience, I realized that what people were going through felt similar to what I had been through, and were following very similar stages. There are 7 stages that one goes through when you're going through an adjustment or a transition to a trauma. And COVID has been traumatic because it has changed the way we live, the way we work, the way our kids go to school. It's changed absolutely everything. And the same 7 stages of immobilization, minimization, depression, acceptance, testing our new reality, searching for meaning, and internalizing this new reality apply to any kind of disruption. And you mentioned just now life events like divorce, even getting married and having children is actually deeply disruptive as much as it's amazing. And then we have the loss of loved ones, whether traumatic or because of a dread disease, or whether it's COVID, or a lot of people semigrating, moving town, even moving country. All of this pushes you through a cycle of grief and loss. So I just want to reassure people that what they're feeling is actually quite normal, and that we are actually more wired to deal with change and cope with change than we think.
You know, Nikki, it's so interesting, actually, that you've drawn the parallels with the stages of grief, because change, and you make the point in the book, is often, even if it's positive change, is a letting go of the old, and it's an acceptance of what is changing. I'm wondering if you could just reflect a little bit. I mean, obviously, it was a very difficult time when your husband was murdered, and those grief stages, as we've heard about before. But what lessons did you learn from that? I think living it as opposed to knowing about it are quite different, that you've actually been able to apply in navigating through this pandemic.
So interestingly, Sally, the night of my husband's funeral, we held a wake for nearest and dearest friends and family. And it was at about 10 o'clock at night when people started to leave. And that's when I really started to cry, because the reality of my situation suddenly became very real. The next day was a Sunday, and I had no clue what a Sunday looked like. And it just felt like a full stop in my life. It felt like the end. And a friend was standing next to me who also happened to be a psychologist. And she said, "Nix, what's happening for you?" And I said, you know, it feels like a full stop. All our hopes and dreams, you know, our plans were just absolutely shattered and dashed. And she said to me, "I want you to try and turn this full stop into a comma, into a pause in your life, not the end of your life." And she added a comma and dot, dot, dot. And she said, the dots are the future that you are going to create for yourself. And at the time, she didn't realize how powerful this framework was going to become in me getting up again. And it's something that I've shared with many, many audiences throughout the pandemic, because we often don't even realize that we've allowed something or circumstances to hold us hostage as a victim in a full stop. And if you can see yourself to turning a full stop into a comma, you get to reauthor your life. And there's incredible power in that. And if you can get perspective. Now, I cannot tell you that that happened on that night. It took about 9 months for me to really internalize what she was talking about. But when she said the dots are the future that you're going to create for yourself, she was giving me responsibility. And so very often when there's trauma, you've got one of two choices. You can either throw your hands up and you can say, you know what, it's happened to me and I'm a victim of circumstance, and you can get buried and time stands still. You're frozen, you're in fight or flight. However, if you can choose to be broken open, then you can be planted like a seed, and there is the potential for enormous growth, and growth that is unanticipated. So curiosity for me is the antidote to fear. And right now, we're in the swirling mists of COVID. We're not even maybe halfway through the maze of COVID, and we can't really see the future, which is very scary when you like to be in control, which is most people. And we have to be brave enough to keep moving forward through the mists without knowing what it looks like beyond.
I love the way you say, you throw out a challenge in the book. You say, are you going to resist disruption or dance with it? And it's about embracing that uncertainty. But you also speak about, so you talk about the need to carry on, the need to do things, but you also talk about the need to pause. And I love the glitter jar analogy, that sometimes life feels like you've taken a jar of glitter and water and just shaken it up and you cannot see a thing. When do you know when to act and do? And when do you know when to sit and pause and let the glitter settle?
Yes, it's a beautiful analogy. And, you know, if your kids have got a snow globe, if they haven't, make a glitter jar, put a couple of teaspoons of glitter in a jar. And it really is a great exercise to shake up that jar and then just put it down and watch it and breathe. I think that's what we don't do when we're traumatized. And one of the things I tell my audiences regularly and start our webinars with is a breathing exercise. And sometimes people just write in the, in the chat, wow, I'd forgotten how to breathe. In fact, what we forget is to exhale. We're holding our breath. And so there is a time to just sit and be with your emotions. And you absolutely have to go through and acknowledge all the dark emotions of depression and anxiety and fear. Fear because we're out of control. We feel incompetent because we've never been here before, and that impacts on our confidence. And when you acknowledge what you're feeling, then you can actually deal with it. It's almost half the battle won. But if you shove all these negative emotions under the rug and you don't deal with them, then they tend to fester and they come out in ever more destructive ways. So this is the time, Sally, that I think people need to make themselves supportable. I didn't get back to sitting in front of a TV camera, a radio microphone, or standing on a stage without a lot of help. And when we're in these depressed, dark places, the last thing you need is to be isolated. And COVID has isolated a lot of people, but we do need to be reaching out and making ourselves supportable. So if you belong to a large organization, you usually have an employee assistance program. Make use of it at this time. If you don't, then find a counselor or an alternative therapist. Talk about what it is that you feel, or go for body work, or even exercise right now is vitally important to raise our endorphins. And then to gain perspective, we have to keep perspective. Otherwise, it can feel like everything is terrible. So I really recommend people do my collateral beauty, collateral damage exercise, which is in the book. And you fold a piece of paper in half, write collateral damage on the left-hand side, collateral beauty on the right. And stream of consciousness, anything that you can think of that's negative because of wherever you find yourself right now. Let's take the pandemic. Write it down. What's happened? What have you lost? All the negative emotions, all the damage. And when you can't write anymore, start writing on the right-hand side. All the blessings, all the good stuff, all the good emotions, anybody great who's walked into your life, the possibilities, the opportunities that have come your way that maybe would not have appeared had the pandemic not happened. And I found that in every single situation, when I apply this framework, I come out with twice as many positives as negatives. And that means we can step back, take a breath, and regain some perspective.
Nikki, you're an absolute inspiration. Thank you so much for chatting to us this evening. That was author, human potential and parenting expert Nikki Bush talking about her new book. It's called Future-Proof Yourself, How to Win at Work and Life. And I tell you, it is a fascinating read. It is available at all major bookstores, also available online.